Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my entitled neighbors placed an illegal fence on my property to block my garage. They then claimed they own our land and ended up threatening to shoot me with a shotgun. These psycho neighbors are totally out of control and I honestly don't know what to do. Let's dive right into the story. The story starts like this. My name is Jerry and together with my wife Marie and my son Luke, we are usually a happy family. We have lived in this neighborhood since Luke was born, so about 6 years now, and we can happily say that we have never had any problems. This all changed when my wife decided to host an open barbecue for the neighbors during a particularly lovely summer, inviting the Smith family next door, who are called Barry and Susie. They moved in late last year and since have mostly kept to themselves, rarely socializing or interacting with us others apart from the odd issue they had when finding additional parking for their large cars. The first bad omen came in the form of black clouds that loomed overhead all day. They never rained, but it was a maintained threat. Our initial opinion of the Smiths were of good and friendly people. We had heard that they do charitable work in their spare time and manage their own businesses, but what we did not expect was for them to be almost an hour late, which seriously ticked me off as they lived literally a minute away. They also brought over their family dog, a terrier they called Monster. Little Luke was overjoyed. He loved dogs, but our old apartment never let us keep pets, a contract clause that left him sulking every Christmas morning. The couple let the dog off its lead and let it to run amok in the yard while we went into the kitchen. Not 2 minutes later we are sent running back outside to the sound of screaming as their dog Rex ripped wildly at Luke's shirt. Paternal instincts kicked in and I leaped across the space and dislodged the dog with a soft punch to its snout, causing it to reel back and whine. I carried Luke back to the house and was met by red-faced anger from the dog's owners. Rather than being apologetic about the ferocious attack, they yelled at me for hurting their precious little baby, whether oblivious or uncaring for the very real danger of the situation. They left after a tantrum and I was all too pleased to let them go. Now aware of the very real and very near threat to our safety, I gathered up my tools and immediately set to erect a fence that weekend to separate our yards. With the fading sunlight, I cobbled together a shabby first draft of half the fencing and dabbed a line of paint across the boundary of our land to mark where the rest would go. I made it orange so that it would be clear to our neighbors as well. In my rush to finish for the evening, I must have overestimated the space needed as the Smiths reacted the next morning as if we had invaded their yard, kicking off a local World War III. It looked as if they had emptied their trash bags all across our yard spaced across the fence line. The debris also included parts of our own fence that had mysteriously come loose from the ground. Under very stern advice from my wife, I bit my tongue and pretended not to notice the hostility, sweeping it up and then continuing on the fence as normal until it was finally finished. Blissfully, I now imagined with our world separated, our troubles would slowly resolve themselves and the Smiths would move on with their lives just as we have. However, oh, what a fool I was. After a quiet week, I began to notice the neighbor had started a small pile stockpiling planks and wire by their back door. Although I did not find it suspicious at the time, as I was also distracted by packing for a road trip to visit the in-laws across the state lines for the long weekend. When we returned the following Sunday evening, I ended up accidentally crashing into something near my driveway. Panicked, I jumped out to assess and found scattered planks of the old fence, only it was not where I had left it. The Smiths took the opportunity to move the bordering fence into our yard, marking their yard with heavy plant pots and a few very early Halloween decorations. Adding insult to injury, my wife discovered her prized flower garden uprooted and destroyed. Despite being the other side of our yard, we were clearly able to follow the muddy paw prints linking their monster to be the only likely suspect. She had been nurturing various flowers since we moved in and had gotten to be quite a well-known local botanist, so this blow hit her hard. So much so that we finally agreed that we could no longer ignore the problem and hope things would get better on their own. I worked tirelessly to undo the damage they had done, moving back the fence to the still present orange line and collapsed into bed soon after. The Smiths graced us with their presence the next morning when they invited themselves in through the open back door as we ate breakfast. Then immediately hounding us about their rights to the fence and how dare I move it back, etc. The standard type of entitled rant. They left dissatisfied when they realized we were not so easily intimidated or would submit to their demands. In the days following this event, their outburst increased in frequency with minor annoyances each day, and we had grown paranoid as a result, flinching at noises in the night like children, expecting to see the boogeyman behind every shadow. When I finally believed they had grown tired of their childish games, they dealt their hand. I came home from work early to find my driveway blocked by laborers and trucks, putting up a strong wooden fence that stretched from their yard through ours and blocking off my garage in clear obstruction. I was outraged, to say the least. When I stormed over to confront them about this new master plan of theirs, they gleamed with delight as they handed me a sealed envelope and waved me away to read it. The contents were a strongly worded letter from their attorney suggesting that they were the rightful owners of our yard, with thinly veiled threats of court action and other consequences should we challenge their authority on the matter. We were forced to wait and watch helplessly over the next 2 days as the workers finished and left while our own attorney looked into it, confidently coming back as bewildered by their letter as we first were. With the law on our side, I asked a few friends over to move the fence back, and now being the third time in very few weeks. Halfway through the job, we were abruptly stopped with a harsh shout from over our shoulders, turning to see ourselves on the other end of a shotgun. The neighbor ushered us into a line on the driveway and demanded we move the fence back. Based on his slurring and shaking, he seemed to be heavily inebriated despite it being just mid-morning. When I tried to refuse, he swung his shotgun back in my direction and fired without hesitation. I instinctively ducked, but by some miracle, or the harsh recoil, his aim was changed to my car instead as he was thrown backwards. Separated from his weapon, the group of us jumped him, holding him secure until the police arrived. The preliminary investigation was quickly wrapped up. Based on evidence and numerous witness statements, there was no way for him to talk his way out this time. Their attorney tried to approach us with a plea deal, their tone much nicer now, but with a crisp satisfaction we turned them down and took them to court. In the ensuing trial, we were cleared of all wrongdoing, while the neighbors were both arrested for faking legal documentation with their attorney, harassment, and attempted murder on his part. He was awarded a jail sentence while she had to sell the house to pay their debt. We haven't gotten any new neighbors yet, but I hope the next ones have a nice dog. And the next story is titled Cheating Revenge. To preface this, I was madly in love with my ex-girlfriend. Together for 4 years, she is quite attractive and very affectionate. She thrived on attention, to which I catered to the best of my abilities. I fondly called her Winter, and she had a cheesy name for me as well, which I choose not to divulge. Overall, I was happy. I earned significantly more than her, apart from the fact that my grandparents left me a hefty amount of money. Although she lived in her own apartment, we live in a very conservative country, live-in relationships are a big taboo, most of the stuff in it was mine. She drove my car, used my laptop, and so on. I got a crappy 32-inch LCD TV, while she bought a 60-inch Bravia and defaulted on payments, after which I had to pay for it. This was not an insulated incident either, because she had a lot of things I was paying for. I admit that I was a doormat in blissful ignorance of all the red flags. So one day I was at her place and I used her laptop to check my email. I could not remember her Wi-Fi password. Her Gmail account opened up, and as I went to sign out, a Hangouts notification popped up which said, "God knows I love your body. 7, same park. Night at my place. Wear the dress my name bought for you so I can tear it apart." There were no other texts on that chat head. She probably deleted it. It was my student. My barely 18-year-old first-year student, whom we will call Was. I cannot describe how I felt at that moment. It was a wild cocktail of emotions. I slammed her laptop and stormed out of her place. But I was foolish enough to not take any evidence, but they were supposed to meet up the next day and I could catch them red-handed. Next day, I go to the place where they were supposed to meet and catch them making out in my car. I knock on the window, ask for my keys, and tell her to never talk to me again. She was sobbing, apologizing, and so on. I asked Wuss to drop her home, and he just bolted like his tail was on fire. I can never forget the look on their faces, that sudden paleness and shocked expressions. Wuss also forgot his phone in my car. Meanwhile, I'm being bombarded with text of her apologizing. I then block her. I left this detail out of the post I made on r/relationships, but I spent the next 2 days drinking myself to oblivion, and hung over me left a lot of fuzzy details in the post. I tried calling my best friend, but he was away for a business trip, so I didn't want to disturb him. All I did for 2 whole days was drink, puke, sleep, eat and repeat. 2 days later, when I came to my senses, I went through my bank statements and then cancelled our joint account. Well, she withdrew almost all of the money in it, out of which a large amount was mine. I was still being bombarded with texts and calls, but sometime during my drunken furor, I cracked my phone's screen and thus rendering it useless. So I got my backup phone and see a barrage of notifications. As it turns out, she posted on Facebook that I'd been cheating on her and that I was an emotionally manipulative, two-faced douchebag who sleeps with his students. We had a lot of mutual friends, most of who blocked me then. Someone even created a WhatsApp group and they abused me and said horrible things about me. She even turned my sister against me. Our father left our mother for a woman half his age. Our mother got depressed and died after a few years, and thus she was overly sensitive about infidelity. But my ex was also horribly manipulative and she pushed all the right buttons to make my sister hate me. The ex was hitting all the past wounds. She knew about our father. She said things like "chip off the old block" and "he's just like your father" and many more horrible made-up things. She got very depressed because of this, and also several of her friends were on my ex's side. This has probably put a permanent strain on our relationship. Word about ex's Facebook posts spread like wildfire in the college. They pinned a shy, socially awkward girl as being my mistress and shamed that poor girl. To be honest, I've never even noticed her. The revenge, finally, the part everyone was waiting for. She effectively ruined my reputation and goodwill I had created in my community and among my peers, and put my job in jeopardy. She turned my only family, my sister, against me. I later showed her the apology text my ex sent me, and then she apologized to me because clearly I was the victim, not her. Several people here suggested I should contact a lawyer, which I did, so the next day when I went for work to take a few days off, I see Wuss and his father for me. Somehow I resisted the urge to punch him. He apologized and told me that he would do anything so as to not get him out of college. I asked him if he would testify in my favor, and he obliged. I tell him that I won't be able to save him because that was out of my power. He told me he would still testify in my favor, and he sent me several screenshots of his chats with the ex, thus confirming that she was cheating on me and not the other way around. I pressed charges under IPC, Indian Penal Code Section 499, defamation 500 and 504, intentional insult with intent to provoke breach of the peace. The day of the hearing was frankly the best day of my life since the breakup. She said a lot of malignant things about me, was yelling to the point that the judge had to scold her. Her lawyer asked for an out-of-court settlement, but I politely declined because it's not only my life she has inevitably screwed over, it would have been a lot more cheaper and I would have gotten some dough, but screw her. This was quite a scandal, but since I have a tenure of 5 years, they cannot fire me. I was transferred to another college instead. Same pay, same incentives, but I will have to travel a bit more than I prefer. As for her, she is knee-deep in crap. She was a librarian, she is a library science major in the institution I worked for, and was fired as soon as I notified the authorities. The reason being, philandering with a student. This has also screwed up her chances at procuring a job in the future. She also faces jail time, as mentioned under Section 500 and 504, which can extend up to imprisonment for over 2 years. A fine or even both, and Indian jails, jeez. She can post for bail, however, Wuss has been expelled. The money she stole, that would be going to her lawyer. My best friend went to her apartment, got my stuff back for me, which included a futon, a refrigerator, an air conditioner, a laptop, and several expensive electronics and some jewelry. She would keep the TV though because it is in her name. She would probably have to sell it because lawyers ain't cheap. She has no job now and no savings. This is in India, and as you might have guessed, people are very conservative here. At some point she will have to reach out to her parents, who still think that she is a virgin. The next one is titled Mixer Malicious Compliance. Years ago, I worked for a high-end contracting company. It was a small business, about 10 people total, including the 3 owners. 2 of them were brothers and were in charge of large renovations, and the third was in charge of all the custom cabinetry and high-end furniture we made in the shop. He was my direct boss. I only ever interacted with the brothers occasionally, normally in the mornings and afternoon when they would come to pick up and drop off tools in the cargo van. Part of my job duties every day included cleaning up their tools and putting them away, and I cannot leave until it is done. Now the brothers had a bad habit of never washing the mixing stick for cement. Every day it would come back caked in dried concrete that I would have to spend up to an hour breaking off. I had asked them several times to just wash it down with a hose after they used it, but was always met with, "Oh yeah, we'll remember next time." After a few months of this, I was getting pretty frustrated. One extremely hot summer day, I was sitting on the dock of the shop waiting for them. I was caked in sweat and sawdust from making cabinets all day, and I was in a bad mood. They pull up and we start unloading. Lo and behold, they had not cleaned the stick again. The base of it was practically a complete ball. Me? Seriously? What the hell? B1. "Oh yeah, sorry." Me? "How hard is it to wash it off? I have asked for months." B2. "It is your job to clean it. Just clean it." Cue the malicious compliance. I lifted it up, brought my arm back and swung it as hard as I could at the side door of the cargo van. The sound of denting metal was huge, most of the concrete blasted off of it. I handed the stick to the flabbergasted brother and said, "There, I cleaned it," before walking back into the shop. Both brothers wanted to fire me but couldn't. The third guy was my boss and refused as well. He told me a month later that every time he saw the dent he laughed and they always brought it back clean afterwards. Obligatory edit: to those that ask why I didn't just bang it all the time, it's a $15 tool. If I banged it clean each day, it would be so bent that it would need to be replaced each week. That gets expensive. To those that ask why I didn't have to pay for damage to the van, it was a paid-off brutalized van already. My hourly rate was more than the cost of repair for the several months I cleaned it. Since it was already dented, another one did not matter in the grand scheme. The next one is titled, "Wake Up the Boss." I supervised a glass manufacturing department. One night we had an issue with a thermocouple that controls the temperature of the glass. Because it was creating nuisance alarms, the operator disconnected it and forgot to notify the next shift to monitor it manually. We lost control of the furnace for a couple of hours and scraped product. The plant manager came in that morning, screaming, and ripped the entire staff a new one. We were trying to explain that the thermocouple needed to be fixed, but instead he continued to yell at us, tell us we were idiots, and told us to monitor it and notify him every time it went into alarm, or else he would fire us. To further reprimand us, he insisted that we call him at home in the evening every time that temperature went into alarm, so he could ensure we were doing our jobs. What he did not know, and what we knew, was that the alarm for the broken thermocouple happened about every 15 minutes. My operator was worried and asked me what he should do. Since the plant manager was so insistent, I told the operator to wait until after midnight and then call and inform him every time it happened according to his direct request. The plant manager came into work the next morning, very bleary-eyed, and sheepishly told us that we did not have to do that again. He finally listened to us and we got the problem fixed. And the next one is titled, "New A-hole in a peaceful neighborhood learns his lesson." So I live in a quiet little town in the Midwestern United States. My house is the last house at the end of a sleepy little dead-end road. New guy moves in next door, let's call him Dick. Dick was probably one of those guys who was so popular in high school that he thought he had made it without doing any work and tried to spend the rest of his life living off of being the cool guy. The type of guy who drives a lifted truck and a motorcycle. Don't get me wrong, I ride motorcycles myself. What I don't do is sit in my driveway at 2 AM and rev my engine. There is a bit of a downhill slope from the middle of the street to our houses at the end, and Dick likes to race down this hill and then lock his brakes and drift into his driveway. The first winter after he moved in, I noticed that my mailbox has been crushed and there's fresh tire tracks in the snow leading down the street over my mailbox and into his driveway. A few days later, I see Dick standing outside and ask about this. He denies the entire thing, says he doesn't know what happened to my mailbox and that it must have been a delivery guy or something. I figure whatever and fix my mailbox. A few months later the same thing happens again. I fixed my mailbox and move on. Sometime later this happens yet again. this time I'm pretty pissed. So I talked to my cousin, who is a commercial welder, and had him make me a mailbox out of some scrap 1/4-inch steel plate, which was mounted on a length of old railroad track for its post. A little bit of glue and some cedar shingles, and you would never know it wasn't a typical wooden mailbox. And also, the railroad track post was sunk in concrete 4 feet into the ground. For the next several weeks I waited with anticipation every time I heard his truck roaring down the street, but nothing. Until about 5 months later, when I heard his truck and then a crash. By this time I had forgotten about my mailbox and thought for sure he had struck another car. I ran out to the street to see if anyone needed help, and there was his truck broadside against my mailbox, all smashed up. He saw me walk up and started yelling about how I had destroyed his truck and he would make me pay, and he called the cops. A cop showed up to take his report, and Dick pointed out how my mailbox had been specifically designed to destroy his truck. I gotta admit, I got nervous at this point. The cop looked around at the truck and the construction of the mailbox and then turned back to us and asked me if I had trouble with my mailbox before. I explained how it has been smashed several times in the past year, and the cop then said, "It is pretty clear what happened here. This is an obvious case of wanton destruction of property." My heart sunk to the ground and Dick got a smug look on his face, but then cop turns to Dick and says, "I'm going to issue a citation for this, as well as reckless driving." You should have seen Dick's face at this point. He was boiling with rage as the cop wrote him 2 tickets and told him he needed to pay for the repair of the damaged wood on my mailbox. The metal was fine, had not even tilted it, but the wood camouflage had broken off. And with this we have reached the end of the video. However, I want to ask you for a favor. If you have watched until here, please check out my new channel called The Readers, where I and other voice actors post daily stories that you will very much enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again tomorrow.